Hello and welcome to Polyglot Principles. My name is Modja and this is the channel where I help ambitious people to become fluent at a language. And the way I do it is by giving them a deep and detailed understanding of the principles of language learning. So if you're the kind of person who's ambitious, you're not contented, you're not satisfied with just becoming intermediate or getting by in the language, but you want to really get to a high level, you want to be fluent, get to C2 level, etc. in the language. If you're that kind of person, then this is the channel for you, right? And if you're also the kind of person who is not satisfied with quick solutions, just being told the quick tips on how to learn a language, but you want to really understand how to learn a language, you want to go really deep into the topic. If you're kind of an understanding-based person, then this is also the channel for you. All right. So let's dig into the material for today. The title is How to Quickly Learn a Language from Scratch. Right. And this is an updated version because I made a video in the past about it, but now I've decided to make it even more rigorous. Right. So how to quickly learn a language from scratch. And look, I usually give very useful tips in my videos right through to the end, as you're going to notice. So make sure to stay till the end of the video, right? So that way you don't miss out on any important ideas, because all it takes is one idea, right, to transform your language learning journey, to make you become fluent or get better at the language, right? One idea could make the difference, and that one idea may be in this video, right? So make sure to stay to the end. Now, as usual, I have a question for you, right? And the question is this: we're talking about how to quickly learn a language from scratch. So the question is, obviously, to learn a language from scratch, or to learn a language, there are certain principles you need to follow, right? So my question for you is, as I usually do, what, in your opinion, are the most important principles which one must follow in order to learn a language? Right? What are the most important principles that one must follow in order to learn a language? Please pause this video, go to the comment section below and write down what you believe to be the most important principles, right, for language learning. And then come back to this video and find out, right, if the principles you've highlighted agree with my principles. It's going to be a fun exercise for you as well. And it's also going to be fun for me, because then I'll get to know what you think, right? And I'll have the opportunity to learn from you. Alright, let's now dig into the meat of this video. So we need to clarify some things first, right? The first thing to note is that every language is different. Every language presents its own set of challenges. So you can't really have the same method for all languages, right? So when we talk about how to quickly learn a language from scratch, there is no one method to do it. I mean, consider two languages, like let's say Chinese and German. Chinese has its own set of challenges. If you're an English speaker trying to learn Chinese, you're going to discover that the pronunciation is hard. You're also going to discover that there's no alphabet in Chinese, so you're going to have to memorize thousands of characters, right? So those are some of the two main big difficulties of learning Chinese. One of two, right? Two of many, right? Major difficulties in learning Chinese for an English speaker, let's say. And then, if you decided to learn German, on the other hand, and you speak English, what you're going to discover is that one of the difficulties with German is the articles and the adjectives related to the articles, right? Because German has like 3 articles, right? Die, der, das. That is masculine, feminine, and neutral. So that's a major difficulty, the articles. Another major difficulty in a language like German is going to be the fact that there is the word order, right? It's like the German people think in a weird way. If you're an English speaker, the order of words is just mixed up, right? So these are some of the difficulties you face in German, right? Mixed up word order, the different word order. And the other challenge is just going to be, hey, these articles are hard, right? And Chinese has different challenges, we said before, right? It's going to be pronunciation, it's going to be learning multiple characters. Obviously, because these languages have different challenges, you cannot approach them in the same way. You can't have one method that enables you to do all of them. A much more intelligent way is to behave fluidly, right? Which means, look, you adapt your method depending on the language you're learning. If you're learning Chinese, you approach Chinese differently. If you're learning German, you approach If you're learning German, you're going to approach German differently, or whatever your language is. It's not wise to have a cookie cutter solution or method that you force or try to fit into every language that you're trying to learn. That is just not an intelligent way to approach it. So obviously, I'm not going to spend this video giving you the one holy grail method that will help you learn any language. That being said, there are certain things, certain principles of language learning that are the same no matter what language you're learning. Right? These principles will enable you to improve as quickly as you can in whatever language you're trying to learn. And that's what I'm going to really talk about in this video, the principles, the key principles of language learning, which if you follow them will lead you to a very high level, right, in the language. It will enable you to get to the levels that interest you, right, which is fluency and even above fluency, native level type performance. All right, let's iron out some more. We're talking about how to quickly learn a language from scratch, but there's this word quickly here. You know, the word quickly makes me uncomfortable. On the one hand, we want to do things quickly, obviously, right? Because why spend 5 months, right? Let's say, if you can, let's say, get to a certain level in a language in 1 month. Let's say you can get to B2 level in 1 month. Sorry, let's say you can get to A2 level in 1 month. Let's say that, right? Probably you could do it a little faster. But it's not wise if it takes you 5 months to get to A2 level when maybe you can get to it in 1 month, right? That doesn't make sense, right? You want to do things as quickly as possible. That makes sense. So speed is important. This is why I make these videos, right? I want to give you the principles of language learning because I want to help basically shortcut as much as possible your process, right? Your journey in language learning, right? Basically, I don't want you to spend years, months or years on wasted techniques, on wasted methods that are not leading you anywhere. I wanna give you the right methods, the right principles, so that you can really grasp the language, right? This is what interests me. So obviously, speed is important to me. I want you to learn the language as quickly as possible. However, right, speed has a problem. There's a certain problem with quickly and speed. Because if you're watching these videos, this channel, as I mentioned before, is for people who want to have a deep understanding of a language. You want to become fluent. You're an ambitious person. You're not happy to just be intermediate or to get by in the language. If that is your goal, right, you're not going to attain it quickly. You're not going to become fluent, native level in a language in 1 month. Right? That's going to take a while, right? A year or even more than a year. Right? So obviously, if you go into it with the mindset of doing things quickly, it's going to be frustrating for you because it takes time to learn a language. It takes time to get fluent at a language. Okay? Right? To be able to speak and people can't find grammatical errors in what you're saying. That takes time. It's not an easy thing to do. Right? So if you have the mentality of I want to do this quickly, that's already a problem. Right? Because it focuses you on results and takes you away from the process of learning the language. Because you're going to spend most of your time in the process, right? So you might as well learn to enjoy it. So this is my trouble with quickly. So obviously, just based on what I'm saying, quickly varies, right? Quickly doesn't mean the same thing. If your goal, for example, is to be able to just have basic conversations with people, then look, if you do that in a week or 2 weeks, we'd say you've done it quickly, obviously, right? And that's really quick. 2 weeks, being able to. In 2 weeks, you can have basic conversations, talk to people, be a tourist, etc. That's amazing, all right? Now, if your goal is to become fluent at the language, to get to a native-like level at the language, if you're able to do that in a year, that is also quick, right? Because it's amazing to be able to start from beginner, get to a native level in a language or a high level of fluency within 1 year. That's amazing. That's also quick. So my job here is not to just help you become fluent in 2 weeks. No. But what I'm going to try to help you to do here is to attain your goal as quickly as possible. Right? To get you to fluency as quickly as possible. But knowing that this quick is also going to take time. All right? So the other thing that's really in our title of the video, right, that we need to iron out a bit, that's very useful, is how to quickly learn a language from scratch. That's the title of our video. Now, there's this idea of learning a language from scratch. Now, the reality is that you are not... Oh, sorry, one moment. Let me make sure things are... Okay. All right. So let's talk about learning a language from scratch, right? The first thing to recognize is that you never really learn a language from scratch. The only people who learn a language from scratch are babies. Those are the only people who learn a language from scratch. But because they come into the world literally knowing nothing. All they know is how to cry, right? And they have to learn the concept of language and really learn a language from scratch. But as an adult, or if you're able to understand what I'm saying now, it's not possible for you to learn a language from scratch. Here's why. For example, if you're listening to me, it means you understand English, right? If you understand English, then you know that English is the most powerful language on the planet, right? Which means, right, the most powerful as in it's the superpower America speaks English. As a result, English has pretty much influenced every language there is on the planet, right? It's hard to find a language that has not been influenced by English. In fact, there are many words in English that are now in almost every language you find is going to have some English words in it. That's just how it is. So that if you try to learn any other language, you're going to find that you already know a few words. Maybe the word internet is going to be the same in the language you try to learn. Word like Google might be the same in the language you're trying to learn. And there's going to be many words relating to technology are probably just going to be words in English. So when you start learning any language, you already know a lot of words. So you're not starting from scratch, right? Don't let it intimidate you. Don't let the new language intimidate you. You already have tools at your disposal. You already know some vocabulary. It's not so bad. But you're not really starting from the very beginning. And if you push through, you can get to a high level in the language, right? And look, that's just on the level of words. The reality is that the other thing you need to realize is that you are already fluent at some other language. You have a mother tongue and you're already fluent at it. Now, this mother tongue already gives you an advantage when you're trying to learn a new language because there are certain principles you've already learned. Maybe you already learned how to write, so you already understand the principles of writing. A lot of the important principles of writing you already understand. So if you pick up a new language and you're trying to learn how to write in the language, you're not starting from scratch. You can leverage what you already know about writing and adapt it and adapt it so that it can work in the language that you're trying to learn. So actually, you should be able to learn faster than, let's say, your mother tongue, right? Obviously. Because, I mean, you have an advantage. You now know a lot of stuff about how language works, right? Things like grammar are no longer foreign concepts. You know grammar already. You know some grammar structures. You know what tenses are, etc. Right? So when you try to learn a new language, you're not starting from scratch. You have all these tools that you can be brought to bear to help you learn the language. I know many people give the impression, people like to believe that the languages you already know are really an impediment. They stop you from learning. Like if I know English and I'm trying to learn German, English is actually like an impediment. It puts me at a disadvantage when trying to learn German. That's not true. I mean, it can do that, right? If I don't know how to, like, there is some truth to it. A language can interfere. For example, my English can interfere with my German, right? It's possible, right? But there's things I can do to make sure it doesn't interfere. However, the key thing to note here is that the fact that I know English makes it easier for me to learn, let's say, German or any other language, right? Because I can leverage already a lot of the tools that I have. So your language that you have is actually an advantage, not a disadvantage. And feel free to use it, right? Like, there's nothing wrong. Like, let's say you're learning your target language and you're trying to understand a certain grammar structure. It's not wrong to compare that grammar structure with the grammar you've been learning in, let's say, let's say grammar structure in the language you already know. Maybe the tenses are the same or there are similarities. Right? It's not a smart idea to just discard the languages you already know because you think they're bad and they're interfering with the new language. No, they're actually helpful. If you use them correctly, they'll accelerate your language learning. All right. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get into the principles. What are the principles of what principles can you follow in order to learn a language from scratch, right? Quickly from scratch, as quickly as possible. So here's the first important principle. Let's see if you wrote that down in the comment section or if it's something that you're thinking. The first obvious principle is when learning a language, you need to have clear goals, right? Obviously, right? So what happens if you obey this principle? If you have clear goals, then the goals tell you what to do and what not to do. That's one of the biggest advantages, right, of having a clear language goal, right? If your goal is, let's say, to know enough French so that you can be able to attend university studies in French, that's a very specific goal. And then knowing that that's what you want to do will tell you what activities to do and what activities not to do, right? So if you know that you want to be able to, let's say, okay, let's use something more basic. Let's say your goal is really small. All you want to do is to be able to have some basic conversations in French. You don't want to be so sophisticated. You don't want to talk about politics or philosophy. You just want to have a basic conversation. If that's your goal, right? Obviously, the activities you decide to do are going to be different. Especially if you only focus, let's say your focus is only on speaking, having basic conversations in the oral form, and you're not interested in reading and writing. If you know that, obviously you're not going to spend your time learning how to read and write. Obviously, right? Because it's not necessary. It's not taking you to your goals. And you might not spend so much time learning grammar if you just want to get to a basic level in a language. Instead, you'll focus on just speaking, for example, right? So basically, your goal is telling you what to do and what not to do, right? So if you disobey, okay, another really big advantage, right, of obeying this principle of having clear goals is that it's easy to measure your progress. If I know where I'm going, I can check, hey, how far am I from my goal? How much progress have I actually made, right? If my goal is to be able to go to a Chinese restaurant and be able to order food in Chinese, right? That's a specific goal, right? Then it's easy for me to know whether I've reached my goal or not, to measure my progress. I'll just have to go to a restaurant and see, can I order food in Chinese? If I can order food, congratulations, I've succeeded. If I can't order food, okay, there's still a way to go. It's easy to measure. But if I have a vague goal like, I want to be good at the language, I want to be fluent at the language, you see. Fluency is also, you have to define what fluency means for you. Just fluent, it's kind of hard to know, what does that mean, right? If you don't have a clear goal, right, what's going to happen is if you just say, I want to be good at the language, well, what does good mean, right? How will you know when you've become good? Right? Because whatever level you get at in the language, you're always going to find areas where you struggle, right? For example, yeah, I'm an English speaker, but if you told me to start talking about, let's say you asked me to start talking about what? You asked me to give a speech or to make a conversation about, well, let's say, meteorology, right? I'm actually pronouncing it badly. Meteorology, right? So basically concerning the weather, right? You want me to talk about, let's say, okay, that's probably, I know something about that. Let's say you ask me to talk about, I don't know, like to give a detailed conversation about the history of Ecuador. I'm not going to be able to do it. Why? I'll just I'll not be fluent at all, right? Because it's just, I know nothing about Ecuadorian history. I'm going to be like, I think I'll not be fluent at all when I'm talking about Ecuador, right? However, my level in English is really good, right? I'm fluent in English, yes? But now that's why it's important to define it. Because if I define fluency as I need to be comfortable talking about everything, obviously I'll never become fluent, right? So it's important to define and have clear goals so you know when you've met them and you also know what to do and what not to do, right? So if you disobey this principle, if you disobey and you don't have clear goals, then what's going to happen is that you're going to waste a lot of time, right? Also, here's the one thing to note. You can only hit a target and a non-target by accident. If you don't know what your goal is specifically in the language, okay, sorry, just one moment. I need to check something. Okay, so the screen is a little dark. It's dark where I am, but you can see me. So maybe I'll move a little closer here. Okay. So if you don't know what your goal is in the language, right? Obviously, you're not going to get, the chances of you hitting your goal are very remote, right? And so you're not really going to get anywhere that way. Let's say that my goal is just to have a basic conversation in French, but that's really what I want, but I haven't figured out that I really want to have a basic conversation in French. And so basically what ends up happening is I think to myself, I come up with a vague goal like, oh, I want to be fluent. Then what's going to happen is I might spend a lot of time on activities that are just not getting me to where I want to get. Like I mentioned before, I might spend a lot of time doing grammar when in fact it's not necessary for me to do grammar, right? It's not necessary for me to do grammar because all I want to do is have a basic conversation. And I can have a basic conversation without having very good grammar. So I think we've beaten a dead horse here with this concept a bit, right? And is there a reversal to this principle? Are there cases where it's in your best interest not to know, have clear goals? Sometimes, right? So let's say, for example, you're learning a language, right? Suppose you're trying to learn a language, and what's happening is that you've never learned a language before, right? So you don't know how much progress you can make, right? And you don't even know if this is something you want to commit to long term. In such a case, it might be a good idea just to try it out. Let me try out the language. Let me try to practice a few things and see how it goes, right? That might be the right approach. You might not need very clear goals because clear goals might turn out to be too much work and you never get started, right? The other thing is if you have a clear goal and your goal is big, which is likely to be the case because you're on this channel, right? You're an ambitious guy. So look, let's say you want to be extremely fluent. You want to become very fluent at a language, which means maybe you want to sound like a native when you speak, right? That might be what fluency means to you. If that is your goal, right, you know it's going to take a long time. It might take a year to do it. Knowing that information might discourage you from taking the first step. In such an instance, it may be in your best interest not to have a very clear or specific goal, right? But obviously it's best to have a goal, but right, every rule has an exception. That's why we're talking about the reversal. All right, so we've done principle number 1, have clear goals. Principle number 2, have a compelling why, yes? It's important to know why you're learning the language. Why is that? If I know why I am learning the language, then when things get hard, and they will get hard, every language has its own difficulties. At some point you'll feel frustrated. When things become frustrating, you need a reason to continue, right? You need a good reason to keep going, to keep learning the language. If you don't have a good reason, it's going to be very easy to quit, right? So like, if let's say I'm learning Spanish because it would be nice to know Spanish, okay? That is not a compelling reason, right? In particular, what that means is that when things get hard and Spanish gets difficult, I'll ask myself, my mind will ask me, hey, why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through all these difficulties? And like, if my reason is, oh, it would be nice to learn Spanish, that's not good enough. Likely I'm going to quit under those conditions, right? So one of the biggest advantages of knowing why you're learning a language, the advantage of obeying this principle is that it enables you to persevere through difficulties. The other thing it enables you to know is if you are trying to figure out why you're learning a language, right, that alone will enable you to drop activities that are meaningless to you. Like if you sit down and try to figure out why are you learning Russian and you still can't find a good reason for learning Russian, then that probably means you shouldn't be learning Russian. It's probably not important to you. Right? Figuring out why helps you to figure out what is important and what isn't. Maybe Russian is not important to you, but Spanish is, right? Or maybe languages are not important to you at all. And figuring out your why will stop you from wasting a lot of time and stressing yourself out over something that has no meaning for you, right? So, but what happens if you disobey this principle? So what happens if you don't have a compelling reason for doing something? One of the most obvious things is that you're going to quit, right? It's clear, you're going to quit. Right? So for most people, if you don't have a good reason for doing something, you're going to quit. But if you have a good reason, you can push through anything. Like a good example is, look, many people in the world hate their jobs, right? This is just, most people hate their jobs. Most people don't want to wake up in the morning, right? Because they have to go again to this annoying job and do the same stuff over again that they really hate. Most people hate their job, right? But they keep going day after day. The reason they keep going, the reason they keep pushing through this work that they don't like, spending time with coworkers that they don't like, is because they have some sort of compelling reason to do it, right? Someone can say, okay, I need to support my family. And that reason is what makes them go through this boring, painful job, right? Someone, smart guy said this, like, if you have a good why, you can put up with almost anyhow. right? Leverage this principle when learning a language, right? If you know why you're learning the language, right, then it doesn't matter how hard it gets, you'll be able to tolerate it and keep going because you have a compelling reason to do it, right? So is there a reversal to this? Are there cases where it's in your best interest not to know why you're learning the language, not to have a compelling reason for learning the language? So I try to think about this. I can't think of any reversal, any situation under which it's a good idea not to know why you're learning a language. So disobey this principle at your own risk. All right. The third principle that's very important when trying to learn a language is begin with pronunciation and intonation. That's very important, right? So, I mean, many people have this perspective that you don't need pronunciation and intonation. Like this pronunciation is not so important. What's important is like learning words and communicating ideas, right? And besides, like, I mean, I think when I was learning Spanish in university, they used to say, oh yeah, this pronunciation stuff will come later. And we went from beginner, intermediate, advanced class, and we never learned how to pronounce stuff or do intonation. And of course, the result was most of the students who did not put effort into pronunciation had terrible pronunciations, right? Many of them, it was very hard to understand what they're trying to say. Just terrible, terrible sound, right? So, no. Pronunciation is actually important, right? Pronunciation is important, right? It enables you to express yourself better. And if you understand pronunciation and the sounds and the intonation, not only are you able to express yourself better, you're able to understand other people better. And the other really interesting thing is that your comprehension will increase. Even your reading, your listening comprehension, even your ability to read and understand material will improve, right? Oh, okay, learning how to pronounce stuff, okay, I don't know if that does it actually, but if you know how to pronounce things and you have a good intonation, your oral expression is going to be good and your listening comprehension is gonna be better. I don't know if it will improve your capacity to read. But actually, maybe it will, because when you're reading in a language, typically you're sounding out the words. If you read a sentence like "I love Modja," right? When you look at the symbols, you're reading them out in your mind, and being able to read them out in your mind actually kind of helps you in the reading process. Being able to pronounce them in your mind helps you with the reading process. So I think it might be easier to say them in your mind if you already know how to say them verbally, right? But that's a bit of a stretch, right? So we know the advantages. What happens if you obey the principle? If you obey this principle of beginning with pronunciation and intonation, one advantage we've just said now is, hey, it's going to it's going to enhance your ability to speak, your ability to listen. The other advantage of obeying this principle The advantage of obeying, starting with pronunciation and intonation, is that you don't internalize bad habits, right? It's very easy to internalize bad habits. Like if you mispronounce a word, right? Let's say instead of saying cat, you say Kate. And you keep saying Kate, 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 and you repeat it and you practice it for a year. And then suddenly someone tells you, oh, you pronounced that badly. It's going to be very hard to undo the bad habits. It would have been much better if you had started out pronouncing cat correctly, and now you don't have to undo bad habits. That's another advantage of starting with pronunciation and intonation, is that you don't have to later on undo bad habits of pronunciation. Right? But what happens if you disobey this principle? Right? So what happens if you don't begin with pronunciation and intonation? Right? You don't work on your pronunciation and intonation from the beginning. One of the things that will happen is it might be possible that people will not be able to understand what the heck you're saying. Right? I had a professor, my math professor in college was like that. Right? She'd been speaking English for years, but when she spoke, it was like she was speaking a foreign language. It was extremely difficult to understand her. And you don't want to be like that, you know? You want to be the kind of person who, from the very beginning, like, people can understand every word that you're saying. Right? That's, or at least not in a short time, you want that to happen. You don't want to be like at intermediate level and people are struggling to hear what you're trying to say because you never spend time learning how to pronounce and do have the right intonation, right? And of course, when I talk about intonation, I'm talking about pitch in a sentence. There's a bit of a difference between pronunciation and intonation. Pronunciation is the individual sounds, and intonation is kind of like the pitch. For example, I am happy, right? Happy has been given a high pitch, high intonation. I could have said I am happy, and that would change the meaning, right? And there's a bunch of acceptable intonations in any language, and you want to know them, right? You want to know them and know the correct intonation, right? Because if you don't have the correct intonation, one of the things is that you're not going to be able, people will be able to notice that you're a foreigner, right? And in my mind, the holy grail of language learning is being able to get to a point where native people in the language have a difficult time believing that you're a foreigner. That once they have a difficult time believing that you're a foreigner, or they're asking you to show them their passport to prove that you're a foreigner, that's really evidence that you really understand, right, the language. So that's the holy grail. But if your intonation is off and your pronunciation is off, that's never going to happen. So, well, okay, is there a reversal to this principle? Are there cases where it's in your best interest, where you don't need to spend your time learning how to pronounce words or learning correct intonation? Now, there are such cases, I think. For example, it may be that you're a natural, that you have an easy time picking up correct intonation and pronunciation, right? And so you're the kind of person who, like, even if you don't practice it, you're gonna pick it up by speaking to people. After a while, you'll just have the correct intonation, the correct pronunciation. You might be that kind of person. In which case, there is no point, right? Beginning with pronunciation and intonation. So that's the reversal to the principle. All right. The other thing that's really important is the fourth principle, right? The fourth principle of language learning that's really important is you need to identify and correct. Oh, actually, just before we even go to the fourth principle, right? So I have made a video that teaches you how to improve your accent, how to improve your pronunciation, right? And if you want to learn more about that, the name of the video is called How to Improve Your Accent. I'm going to put, the link is already in the description of this video. So if you click on the link, you'll be able to learn more about how to improve your pronunciation and especially your pronunciation and your accent, right? That way you don't, you avoid being misunderstood, or you've been speaking the language for years and nobody knows what the heck you're saying, and you're not able to get to this to the point where you're speaking like a native, right? Because you don't have good, you have a poor accent, right? So I show you how to do that, and there's a video. If you just click in the description, there'll be how to improve your accent video. Okay. The fourth principle of language learning is identify and correct your mistakes. This is absolutely important. Our mind, one of the most powerful ways through which our mind learns things is through contrast. Right? That's one of the most powerful. Oh, just give me a moment. All right. One of the most powerful ways through which our mind learns things is through contrast. Right? Basically, if you know what something is, it means you know what it is not. If you know that something is correct, it means you also know what is incorrect. This is the principle of contrast, right? And in particular, if you want to be able to speak correctly, you need to know what it means to speak incorrectly in the language. If you want to write well, you need to know what it means to not write well, and so on, right? So this principle, it's very important to know what your mistakes are. Because if you don't know what your mistakes are, you'll not be able to correct them. Imagine somebody who, let's say, says I happy, right? Let's say I say I happy, right? Obviously, it's grammatically incorrect. I'm supposed to say I am happy. But suppose I say I happy, okay? And let's say I say that and nobody tells me that I'm making a mistake. Then I will never be able to improve, right? This is obvious, isn't it? I'll never be able to improve. The only time I'll be able to improve is if I realize that I happy is a mistake. Then I'll be able to figure out, oh, wait, how do I say it correctly? Then I can say, oh, I am happy. Yes? And this is, I mean, it's amazing, but there's many people who actually don't take the time to know what their mistakes are. And the funny thing is that at the very beginning of a language, at the very start of a language, you can, at the very start of a language, typically you get feedback. You get to know what mistakes you're making. Right? If you say, usually at the start of a language, you say things and people don't understand. People will be like, what? What do you mean? Already you know that, oh, I've made a mistake. Then you can try to correct it, right? And try to say things correctly. But when you get to an intermediate kind of level and closer to advanced levels, what's going to happen is that your grammar is not perfect. You're making a lot of mistakes, but now people are able to understand you in spite of your mistakes. So what's going to happen, let's say if you're having a conversation with someone, is with a native, you're going to speak and make a mistake, but they're not going to correct you. And the reason they're not going to correct you is because they'll be like, hey, they understand what you're saying. There's no need to correct you. And the problem is that you're going to think that because they didn't tell you that you've made a mistake, it's easy for you to think that, not to realize that you've made mistakes. This happens to me a lot with my conversation partners. There's people who practice English with me. We do an exchange program. They teach me German, I teach them English. These people have like an advanced level in English. Some of them we've been practicing for months and there is no improvement in their skill level. And the reason there is no improvement in their skill level is because they are not aware of their mistakes, right? And so if they're not aware of their mistakes, how the heck are they going to improve, right? This is kind of obvious, isn't it? So one of the things I recommend, simple things, right, to make sure that you're always aware of your mistakes, is if you're speaking, why not record the things that you're saying and then go over it later and find out what mistakes you made, right? You could maybe do it with a native or somebody to help you identify what mistakes you're making. You always want to be aware of your mistakes. If you're aware of your mistakes and you correct your mistakes, you're guaranteed to improve. However, if you're not aware of your mistakes, you're going to stay in the plateau. This is one of the reasons why some people always remain in the intermediate plateau or an advanced plateau where they never really improve. It's because they've stopped identifying and correcting their mistakes. They're not even aware of their mistakes, right? So this is really key, right? Know your mistakes, figure out what your mistakes are, and correct them. Then you'll definitely improve. This principle cannot be violated. If you violate it, you're in trouble, right? But anyways, let's be balanced here, right? So let's ask a question. Is there a reversal? Are there conditions under which it's in your best interest not to know your mistakes or correct them? Right? Are there times where violating this principle is in your best interest, right? Disobeying the principle of identify and correct your mistakes. Are there cases where that's okay? Well, the answer is yes. There are some cases where that's okay. For example, let's suppose that you're really bad at a language, right? You're really bad at a language, right? If I decided to tell you all the mistakes that you've made, it might feel so overwhelming and then you might quit. In such a situation, it might have been better for me not to tell you, not to make you really aware of your mistakes. At least because then you might have continued practicing. And then after you'd have gained some confidence, I could start telling you what your mistakes are. So that's one instance in which, that's a reversal, in which it's not necessary for you to identify and correct your mistakes necessarily. Another point where it might not be a good idea to be aware of your mistakes is, for example, if let's say you're too good at the language, you're really good, right? And I tell you, hey, you're excellent, you're making very few mistakes. What's going to happen? It's possible, right? If you're not properly set up, it's possible for you to become proud, right? I remember when I got really good at Spanish at some point, and I was receiving a lot of praise, and I realized I was making few mistakes in Spanish. Professors were amazed at me, and I became proud, and I stopped learning, and I was less open to correction, right? So in such a case, maybe it would have been better for me not to know that I was so good or that I was making so few mistakes. It might have been in my best interest if the professors had not told me that, or they had not told me how remarkable it is, how few mistakes I'm making. Maybe that might have encouraged me to make more progress. Eventually, I was able to correct. I was able to understand how that attitude, this kind of pride that I've gotten good, was actually stopping me from getting to the next level, right? Okay, so let's look at principle 5. Principle 5 is automatized grammar. Now, there's a lot of debate, right? There's a lot of debate, and in the polyglot community, certain polyglots say grammar is useless. Forget grammar. Grammar is the stuff we used to do in school. That stuff is boring. Right? There's in fact someone who says that don't learn grammar at all because grammar will just be acquired automatically. Right? Some people say learn grammar but learn it later. Right? Others, but my own experience is that grammar is very important. Right? In fact, if you learn grammar properly, it can accelerate your language learning. And no, I don't think you need to wait till the very end to learn grammar. You can start at the beginning, and if you do it correctly, it will help you get better. But the key is to automatize grammar. You wanna learn grammar. You wanna make. Basically, what you wanna do is there's many grammar structures out there. For example, and some of them are very important. There are certain grammar structures which, if you don't know them, you'll always be a beginner. For example, if you don't know the present tense, you'll always be a beginner. If you don't understand the past tense, you'll always be a beginner. If you don't know how to say things in the future, you'll always be a beginner. And there's many other tenses like this, yes? So, what this means is, look, typically here, let's suppose that I don't know the present tense. I haven't understood the present tense, right? Here's what's going to happen. When I'm speaking to someone and I need to express something that's happening now, I'm going to struggle. I'm going to figure out how to say it. It's because I don't understand the tense. And because of that, look, my mind is not free to think about other things. All my focus is on how to say this thing that's happening in the present. However, if I learn the present tense to the level where it's automatic, which means I'm able to use the present tense without thinking about it. If I learn to that level, what's going to happen is that when I try to talk about things now in the present, I'm just going to talk about them automatically. Right? I'm not going to have to spend time thinking about how to say things in the present because I already know how to say it. I'll say it without thinking. So now all the energy I used to spend before trying to figure out how to say things in the present, I can now get that energy and I can spend it on other aspects of the language. Maybe I can spend it on figuring out how to make my argument more logical. I'm able to do that because I've automatized. Certain structures are automatic. And if you pay attention, close attention, you're going to realize that when languages that you speak really well, languages that you are a native at, all the important grammar structures, they're automatic for you. You don't think about how to say something in the future, how to say something in the present. You don't think about what preposition to use. You don't think about what adjectives to use. All those stuff are automatic for you. The rules of grammar are automatic for you. So now you're able to just spend your time focused on how to express yourself better. You think of an idea and it automatically comes out of your mouth because you've automatized grammar. And this is very important, right? The key to automatizing grammar is pretty much you want to pick the correct grammar structure, right? Not all of them are equally important. You want to pick the important grammar structure for you. Then you want to learn the theory for that grammar structure, maybe take a class and know how to use it, like how to form the present tense, how to form the past tense. There's a theory for that. And then you want to practice that structure until it becomes automatic, right? I've noticed that many people don't do this, right? I know some people who just like spend time watching theories about grammar, but they don't really practice enough to drill things in. And that's, as a result, they don't experience much much improvement, right? The key is to make the grammar structures automatic. If you don't make the grammar structures automatic, you're going to speak awkwardly, you're not going to really improve, you're always going to remain a beginner. You're never going to get to a high level because you still have to keep thinking about grammar as you talk, okay? So what happens is there a reversal to this, right? That's the question. Is there a reversal? Are there conditions under which, basically, can you disobey this principle of making grammar automatic and still succeed and still achieve your goal in language learning? Yeah, the answer is yes. There is a reversal. If you decide not to learn grammar, so if you decide not to consciously learn grammar and you decide not to automatize grammatic structures and you keep practicing, but the correct kind of practice, eventually, you will internalize the grammar and it will become automatic. The reason I know this is possible is because look at kids, for example, right? I mean, if you look at a 6-year-old kid, they speak their language with proper grammar, but they've never attended a single grammar class. The reason they're able to do that is because they've been exposed to the language for a long time. And they've, just through trial and error, try and correction, eventually they've internalized the correct grammar. But see, the key here is that they've spent a long time and they've had massive exposure. That's okay for a kid, but you're an adult. You don't need massive exposure. You don't need to be exposed for 2 years to a language before you can learn how to say things properly in the past tense. That's not necessary, right? You can identify that, hey, I need to learn the past tense. You can spend 1 or 2 days learning how to form the past tense. Then you can spend 5 or 6 days drilling the past tense, doing exercises on the past tense so that it becomes automatic. Right? Instead of having to wait for a year or 6 months before it becomes just automatic on its own, right? So it might not take 6 months, but you can do it quicker. This is the advantage of learning grammar and automatizing it, all right? So actually, if you're interested, right? It's not really trivial, this principle of how to learn grammar, how to automatize it. If you want to know more about it, I've made a video on the topic. It's called How to Learn Grammar Like a Boss. I've put a link in the description. If you're interested in learning how to make grammar automatic, how to choose the right grammar structures to learn, then that video is for you. Oh, and by the way, look, I publish videos every Monday at 8 a.m. Central African time. Right? So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on any videos that I come up with, make sure to like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell notification. That way you'll be notified whenever I publish a new video. Like I said, what I do here is the people I'm talking to, this channel I've designed it specifically for ambitious people like you who want to become really good at a language, fluent at a language, and you're a person who likes details. You want to really understand how to learn a language. You want to really understand the principles of language learning, right? And if you're that kind of person, look, I have a lot of material for you here, right? So make sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you can continue to receive that material. All right, principle number 6, right, of language learning. Acquire vocabulary based on utility. Okay. What do I mean by that? Not all words are created equal. For example, consider the word and. Right? The word and is used so frequently in English. Like, it's hard to even think of any conversation that doesn't have the word and in it. So clearly the word and is very important. You need it. If you don't know the word and, you actually can't really speak. It will limit your ability to speak in English. But there are certain words that are not so useful. A word like hypochondriac or bamboozle. You can speak English for years without ever using or hearing the word bamboozle or hypochondriac. Obviously, words like bamboozle and hypochondriac, for most people are not, for most English speakers, are useless words. Why are they useless? Because you never use them, right? Now, what you want to do, the principle here is acquire vocabulary based on utility. What that means is you want to learn words that are useful to you first. Don't spend your time learning words that are not useful to you, right? So there's no point spending your time memorizing words like hypochondriac. Why would you do that, right? Because you rarely ever use hypochondriac. Better words to learn are like to, you, from, and so on, right? And also, look, there's something I want to highlight here. I'm not talking about, when I say acquire vocabulary based on utility, I'm not even telling you that you should memorize vocabulary. Right? Memorizing vocabulary, if you've ever tried to do it, it's not a fun experience, right? It's actually very annoying. It can be very boring. It can be very frustrating. In fact, it can make you procrastinate on learning the language because you're just like, oh, I gotta learn vocabulary again. Right? It's very boring to have like a list of 20 words and you have to memorize them and review them with flashcards and stuff. That's no fun. But the good news is that you don't need to do that. It's not necessary for you to memorize vocabulary. Right? You can use this principle of acquiring vocabulary based on utility. Here's what I mean. Here's one way in which, one application of this principle is, don't spend time memorizing a word. For example, whenever a word shows up and you're able to look it up, understand its meaning, try to pronounce it, right? And then don't even try to memorize it. If the word is truly important, it's going to come up again. Useful words come up over and over. When it comes up again and you're like, oh, I don't remember what this means, look up what it means, try to understand it, right? What you're going to notice is that if the word is really important, it's going to show up frequently. And then maybe after 1, 2, or 3 times of looking it up and looking up its meaning, eventually it's going to be automatically memorized, right? You can acquire, you can automatically, important words are automatically memorized. You do not need to spend time memorizing the word and. You can do that, but it's not necessary. Why? Because just use the language, speak in the language, try to listen, try to understand what people are saying, try to communicate your ideas. In so doing, the word and is going to be so useful that you'll automatically learn it. Your mind automatically retains useful information. Useful information is defined by your mind as information that you use frequently. That's all. And if you use information frequently, you're gonna remember it. No need to waste time memorizing it. If you do what I'm saying here, where you just, like, let's say if you like you're writing or reading and you encounter a word and you just try to understand its meaning and maybe see how it's used in a sentence. If you use this process and you don't even spend time memorizing it, what's going to happen is that after a while, you're going to find that you know all the useful words out of the pure need to express yourself. Like if you start talking, right, and you really need the word and, right, and finally you learn the word, it's going to be burned into your memory because it's useful to you, right? And eventually, after a while of doing this, you're going to learn thousands of words, acquire thousands of words without ever having taken time to memorize them. I mean, think about like when you were a kid in your native language, right? What happened there? Well, do you remember like as a kid spending hours and hours, like let's say when you were 5 or 4 years old, do you remember spending hours and hours memorizing lists of vocabulary? No, you didn't do that. But by the time you were 6 or 7, you knew like thousands of words in the language, right? How did that happen? Utility. You use the language, you try to understand what people are saying, and the important words were automatically memorized, right? This is the power of this principle. Now, is there a reversal to this? So, obviously, the advantage, right? If you observe, if you obey this principle of acquiring vocabulary based on utility, is that one is you avoid the frustration of the boring activity of having to memorize like a list of words. The other thing is that it gives you time. The time that you'd have used to memorize vocabulary can now be used to do other things. You could use it to learn other aspects of the language or do some entirely different activity. Because this activity is useless. It can help you. I don't mean useless, but I mean it's unnecessary. If you do it, it will help you, but you don't need to do it. Even if you don't do it, you'll still improve. You'll automatically acquire vocabulary that's useful to you. Now, if you disobey this principle, that means if you decide, okay, you're not going to acquire vocabulary based on utility, then obviously it means you're going to have to spend some time memorizing vocabulary. And because memorizing vocabulary is so boring for many people, you might find yourself dreading practice. You don't want to memorize words. You start postponing things, and eventually you might even end up quitting on the language entirely, right? All because you're trying to force yourself to do something that is unnecessary. All right, is there a reversal to this? Are there situations where you shouldn't spend time trying to acquire vocabulary based on utility? Yes, there is a reversal, right? At the very start of a language, if you're starting any language, let's say you're starting German today, if you spend time memorizing the 500 most frequently used words in German, you're going to notice a huge jump in your understanding of the language. Your ability to speak will be enhanced, your ability to listen to me will be enhanced, your ability to read will be enhanced, your ability to write will be enhanced if you learn the 500 most frequently used words, right, in the language. That will happen. But what you're going to notice is that over time, learning more vocabulary words is not going to lead to higher improvement in your skill. You reach a point where learning lists of words is no longer useful. If you really want to learn, if you really love this idea of memorizing vocabulary, then at the start of the language, that can be your strategy. You memorize the 500, 1,000 most frequently used words, and then experience a jump, and then you do other stuff. But again, there is no need for you to do this. if you didn't spend a single minute memorizing the most frequently used words in a language, just by using the language, trying to understand the language, all these words, of the list of the 500 most frequently used words, eventually you're going to know all the words on the list or all the useful words on the list without ever having spent time consciously memorizing a single piece of vocabulary. All right. Now, if you're interested in this topic about how to learn, how to memorize vocabulary effectively, especially how to memorize vocabulary the way I'm saying, basically by acquiring vocabulary based on just utility. Just because the word is useful, you automatically memorize it. If you want to know how to apply this principle in order to memorize thousands of words, okay, then I've made a video on the topic, right? It's called Insanely Efficient Method for Memorizing Vocabulary, right? It's also in the description below. You can click on that and learn more about how to do it. All right, let's move to principle 7. The seventh principle of language learning is practice in your sweet spot. What is a sweet spot? The sweet spot is a spot where you don't feel where you're challenged but you're not overwhelmed, right? For example, if you're listening to a language, right? Let's say you're listening to a podcast in the language. If you find yourself, if the material is not overwhelming, which means you can understand it, right? It's not like totally beyond you, like you're listening and you can't understand a goddamn thing, right? And at the same time, it's also the case that the material is not so easy because if you don't pay attention, you might miss out and fail to understand. So you have to stretch yourself, pay attention, but it's not so hard that you can't understand it. This is called the sweet spot. If you listen to material at that level, another word for it is comprehensible, right? But not really comprehensible. I think sweet spot is better. It's like it's not in your comfort zone, but it's not too far out of your comfort zone. If you listen to material that you can barely understand, but if you struggle a bit, you can understand it, what you'll notice is that your listening comprehension will improve, right? This just applies to pretty much anything. Like when it comes to language learning, when you decide to practice, when you do any practice session, let's say you decide to write in the language, you decide to speak, you want to set things up so that it's not too hard for you. If it's too hard, you're going to give up, and that's not good, right? Or if it's too hard, you're likely to give up, right? That's not good, yes? And if it's too easy, you're going to be too comfortable and now you're not going to learn anything, right? What you want is to practice within your sweet spot, right? If you decide to write about things that are not too hard and not too easy for you. If you want to read texts that are not too hard but not too easy. They are in your sweet spot. If you do that, what will happen is that you'll become addicted to practicing the language. And if you become addicted to practicing the language, it means you're going to keep practicing. And if you keep practicing, it means you're going to improve. And eventually you're going to hit your goal of becoming fluent at the language, whatever fluency means to you, right? Obviously, if you don't practice in your sweet spot, then one of two things is going to happen, right? Either it means that the material that you practice is too hard. So if you're doing activities that are too hard, like we said before, well, that's going to lead you to what? You wanna abandon it, right? That's going to lead you maybe to resist practice because it's so hard. Like, for example, let's say you decide to learn Chinese. Let's say you decided to learn Chinese, and so today you decide to practice Chinese for 12 hours. If you do that, that practice would be so hard and so uncomfortable for you that now you don't want to come to practice tomorrow. You don't want to spend another 12 hours tomorrow or another 12 hours every day for a month. That will be so discouraging that you might end up not practicing at all or procrastinating, right? That's the disadvantage of making the material not in your sweet spot, in the sense that it's too far out of your comfort zone. If you make it too easy, then okay, you're comfortable, you're not resisting practice, but the problem is that because you're not challenging yourself, you're not improving, right? Think about, like, let's say, for most English speakers, for example, they speak in English every day, but yet there's not been a remarkable increase in their abilities in English, right? They haven't, like, think about yourself, your English now and your English 5 months ago, right? if you are like most people just having casual conversations in English, you're not really that much better at English now than you were 5 months ago. And the reason is because you have not been challenging yourself in the language. It's been too comfortable for you, right? The moment you start challenging yourself, even in your mother tongue, your native language, you're going to notice an improvement, all right? But, so let's ask another question here though. Is there a reversal to this principle? Are there cases or conditions under which it is in your best interest, it's okay for you to disobey this principle, for you not to practice in your sweet spot? Well, yes, there are such conditions. For example, at the very beginning of a language, right, what you want to do is to get yourself to do at least some practice. Let's say you decided to learn Chinese and you want to learn Chinese pronunciation, right? If you decide that tomorrow, let's say today, you're going to practice Chinese pronunciation for 10 hours, that will be overwhelming to you. You might never get started or you might quit soon, right? But if you decide to, let's say, start by pronouncing Chinese words that are pronouncing Chinese words that you already know how to pronounce, what's going to happen is that there's no resistance, right? At least you're going to show up and you're going to practice. You're not going to have much improvement, but at least you're going to show up for practice. And you're not going to resist coming to practice tomorrow because you're learning sounds that you're familiar with. You're doing something that's easy for you. So that making things super easy can lower the bar enough so that you at least put in some practice. But obviously later you're going to have to increase the difficulty in order to challenge yourself. Otherwise you're not going to grow. But it's okay to make things to lower the bar so much to your comfort zone that at least you get started. Right? It's not smart to raise the bar so high that you don't even want to get started. Right? Now, another reversal is this. Another case where it might be beneficial to disobey this principle of practicing in your sweet spot is you could decide to make your practice hard in the sense that it's way beyond your comfort zone and you're totally uncomfortable. You've challenged yourself too much that it's really uncomfortable, right? This has its benefits also. Of course, we talked about the disadvantages. You're likely to quit and not practice. But if you're able to push through these kinds of practices, what you're going to notice is that because you're challenging yourself so much, you're also going to grow and improve a lot. Right? That's natural. The greater the challenge, the greater the growth. And the other thing you will notice is that your mind will become tougher because you have to push yourself and force yourself to do a hard practice every single day. So you'll develop mental toughness and you'll become more disciplined. So this is the reversal to this principle. Now, when it comes to setting up the correct kind of practice, do you want to create a practice that's in your sweet spot? Do you want to create practice that is repulsive, which means extremely hard, or practice that is way in your comfort zone? What kind of practice is it good to set up? How do you set up practice? If this is a topic that interests you, I've actually made a very detailed video on this topic, right? And the title is How to Become Addicted to Language Learning, right? If you're interested in learning about that, again, go to the description of this video and I've put a link to that video. How to Become Addicted to Language Learning, all right? So let's go to principle number 8 of learning language learning. And this principle says practice every day. Consistency is the key. You want to practice every day, right? It is better to practice for 1 hour every day for 7 days than to practice for 7 hours in 1 day and then spend 6 days without practicing, right? The reason that is if you use the language, if you practice every single day, you're sending a message to your mind and you're telling your mind, hey, this practice, right, this language is very important to us. It's really important. Once your mind knows that something is important, it's going to help you to do it better. That's your mind was created. Your mind's job, your brain is designed to help you survive. If you keep using the language every day, your mind figures this language is important to us. So it's going to work overtime to try to help you to use the language better. But if you take siestas of 6 days without practice, what's going to happen instead is that you're telling your mind this language is not so important. So let's say if you spend 2 days without practice, you're going to be rusty, right? Which means that when you start practice, first of all, you're going to have to put in effort to get to your original level before you can improve, right? This is obviously not good for you, right? What you want to do is to improve every day. Every day you want to be better than you were the day before, right? Because your goal is to become fluent at this language. You don't want to like have to spend a lot of effort trying to, you don't want to spend a lot of effort trying to what? Like overcome rust, you know, to become like to, basically to get back to your original level. You want to be going up, not spending time again to relearning stuff you already know, you see. And the other big importance of practicing consistently every single day is the compound effect, right? So the growth in a language is not linear, right? Like basically if I put in 1 hour every day for 30 days, I'm not going to be 30 times better, right? I'm not going to be 30 times better after 30 days. I'm going to be like 1,000 times better. What I mean by that is that the practices you put in don't add up like in small increments, right? It's the kind of like an exponential curve. Things start out small improvement, and then boom, right? Basically, progress in language learning happens. Sorry, someone shouting. Yeah. So progress in language learning happens. Oh, just a moment. Let me check something. Yeah. Okay. Progress in language learning happens in leaps, right? Which means that when you start learning the language, right? When you start learning the language for the first time, like you're gonna put in a lot of effort and you're gonna notice a bit of improvement. If you're learning languages consistently, you're gonna notice a bit of improvement. And then one day you'll find yourself, oh wow, you'll notice that your level has just gone up. If you've been practicing every day and in the right way, you're just gonna wake up on certain days and you notice that your level you've just blown up, your skill has just blown up. Suddenly your ability to understand has improved dramatically. Your ability to speak has improved dramatically, right? And it seems to have happened all of a sudden. Right? And this is what we call the compound effect. Because if you're using the language every day, your mind is working on the language even when you're not practicing. When you're sleeping, your mind is working on the language. When you're eating a meal, your mind is thinking about the language because it's trying to figure it out because you keep using it every day. And so all this work eventually comes together into a level of understanding where you experience a leap. It seems like you're suddenly better. And that only happens if you practice consistently. If you're inconsistent, these leaps are not going to happen. So natural question is there a reversal? Are there cases where it's in my best interest not to practice every day? Sure, there is a reversal. For example, if your goal is to, right, if you basically already know the language well, right? If you're already fluent at a language, right? Basically, if you're fluent at a language, you can't totally lose the language, right? Let's say I'm fluent at a language. Like for example, I'm fluent in Spanish, but I've spent months without speaking Spanish. But if I wanted to activate my Spanish, I can activate it, right? I don't have to practice every day to maintain the Spanish I have. Now I've gotten rusty, but if I sit down for a week or 2 weeks, I can regain my original level, right? My original level in the language, right? So because I'm already at a fluent level in the language, I don't need to practice every day, right? So this is one case in which it might not be necessary for you to practice a language every day. If you're already fluent at it and you understand it deeply, you can always regain it whenever you want. But obviously, if you wait too long, if you spend too long without practicing it, then you can forget a huge chunk of it and it will take too much time to remember it, right? Okay. Now, if you're interested in this topic of, if you spend a long time without practicing a language, you can forget it. But you might be interested in how do I regain a language that I've forgotten, right? If that interests you, I've made a video on the topic, and the title of the video is called Regaining a Forgotten Language, right? Just go in the description and I'll show you exactly what makes you forget a language and how can you regain a language that you've forgotten because you haven't been practicing every single day in the language. All right, let's look at Principle 9. Principle 9 says, practice as much as possible. Right, this is kind of clear, right? So long as you're doing the correct kind of practice, right? If your practice is in accordance with the principles of language learning, it is indeed true the more you practice, the greater your results. If you practice less, you get less results. That's how it works, right? So if you and I are practicing the same way, and you've only practiced for 500 hours, but I've practiced for 1,000, I'm gonna eat you for lunch every single time. I'm just gonna be way better than you. And the main difference is just because, look, I've practiced longer than you have, right? So you wanna practice as much as possible, consistently as much as possible, all right? So, yeah, it doesn't mean that if like 5 hours every day, but you want to practice, maybe you practice 1 hour every single day, and then sometimes you practice 3 hours or 4 hours, whatever you can do to maximize the total number of hours of practice, and without making yourself get rusty by missing out, let's say, spending a day without practicing and so on. All right. So, I mean, we've covered 9 principles here, right, of language learning. There are many other principles. By the way, did your principles agree with mine, right? Right? The reality is that you probably wrote down principles that I haven't talked about, because there are many principles of language learning, and I can't talk about all of them. But if you continue to watch my videos, then you'll learn more and more of these principles. All right? So, the one thing I want you to note is that, look, when it comes to language learning, there are many methods that can bring you results. There is no one method that will help you to become fluent, let's say, at Spanish. The reality is that there are many methods that you can use to succeed in Spanish, right? But the methods that work are the ones that follow the principles of language learning. If your method obeys the principles of language learning, it's gonna work, right? So, think about these principles and think about other principles you know about language learning. And when it comes to this language that you're trying to learn, try to see if your methods that you're using apply these principles, right? And that is all. You don't need to copy anybody's particular method, right? Just figure out a method that works for you under your conditions, under your schedule, with your temperament, and so on, all right? So we've gone really deep in this video, right? So, look, I've talked a lot about these principles, but if you want to get a deeper understanding of them, right, I've actually written in detail everything I've been talking about here. And it's actually, the detail in my writing is more than what I've been able to say in this hour. So if you want to get a detailed written, basically, a written copy, right, of everything I've said here, of the principles I've talked about here, well, just go to the description, and there's a link that will take you and give you a well-written down. It will give you clearly, right, detailed notes of everything I've just been talking about right now, right? And like I mentioned before, once again, I publish videos every Monday at 8 a.m. Central African Time, right? So if you don't want to miss out on any of these videos, make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell notification. Ding, 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 ding. That way you'll be notified whenever I publish a new video. Thank you once again for listening to this, for watching this video, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Bye.